Add one deliberately bad option to any decision, and people will suddenly want the option you wanted them to pick all along. That is not manipulation by coincidence. It is a documented psychological effect called the decoy effect, sometimes called asymmetric dominance. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it in your own meetings, your own sales decks, and your own project proposals. Here is the classic proof, first laid out by researchers studying magazine subscriptions. Offer people two choices: a web-only subscription for $59, a combined print plus web subscription for $125. Given only those two options, most people pick the cheaper web-only plan. The bundle looks expensive and unnecessary. Now add a third option, print only, for the exact same $125 as the bundle. Nobody, and I mean almost nobody, chooses print only. Why would you pay full bundle price for less than the bundle? But something strange happens the moment that third option exists. The number of people choosing the bundle jumps dramatically. The print-only option is never meant to be chosen. It exists purely to make the bundle look like an obvious steal by comparison. Nothing about the bundle changed. The price did not move. The features did not change. The only thing that changed was what people were comparing it against. That is the entire mechanism of the decoy effect in one sentence. People are bad at judging value in isolation, so they judge value by comparison, and a decoy exists purely to win that comparison for whichever option you actually want chosen. This was not just a clever marketing trick someone stumbled onto. Researchers Joel Huber, John Payne, and Christopher Puto formally documented the effect in a 1982 paper in the Journal of Consumer Research, naming it asymmetric dominance because the decoy is dominated by exactly one of the real options and never dominated by the other, which is precisely what makes it pull choice in one specific direction instead of just adding noise. Their original demonstrations ran across several different product categories, not just one lab trick, which is part of why the effect held up so well once other researchers tried to replicate it. It works with magazine subscriptions. It works with popcorn sizes at a movie theater. It works with software pricing. It works with wine lists. And it works, whether you realize it or not, inside your own team's decision-making every time you bring options to a room. Let's walk through where you have probably already seen this, even if you never had a name for it. Software pricing pages almost always use 3 tiers, a basic plan that feels underpowered the moment you actually read the feature list, a professional plan that feels reasonably priced for what a normal team actually needs, and an enterprise plan priced far above both, often loaded with features most buyers will never touch. That enterprise tier rarely sells in volume. Its job is not to sell itself. Its job is to make the professional tier look like the sensible, mature choice by comparison. Take away the enterprise tier entirely, and suddenly the basic plan starts looking a lot more attractive than the company selling it actually wants. Car dealerships run a version of the same play with trim levels. A base model stripped of features nobody really wants to live with. A mid-tier trim that happens to include exactly the features most buyers care about at a price that feels earned. And a fully loaded top trim priced high enough that almost nobody buys it, sitting there purely to make the mid-tier trim look like the smart, practical choice rather than the second most expensive option on the lot. Restaurants do the same thing with wine lists. Somewhere on that list sits one bottle priced absurdly high, sometimes triple the next most expensive option. Almost nobody orders it, but its presence quietly makes the second most expensive bottle feel like a smart, moderate choice, instead of the most expensive thing on the list, which is exactly what it is. Streaming services run the identical structure. A basic ad-supported tier that feels cheap but restrictive. A standard tier, priced to feel like the obvious middle ground for a normal household. And a premium tier, bundling extras like extra simultaneous streams or higher resolution that most subscribers will never actually notice, existing mainly to make the standard tier look modest and sensible by comparison. Gyms do this with membership levels just as often. A bare-bones tier with blackout hours nobody wants. A standard all-access tier priced to feel fair. And a premium tier with perks like guest passes or personal training credits that anchor the standard tier as the reasonable middle choice. Insurance plans do the same thing with coverage tiers. and meal kit subscription services do it with box sizes and delivery frequency options, always with one tier that exists mainly to make a specific other tier look like the obviously smart pick. Subscription boxes do it with tier names and quantities: a small box, a medium box priced to look like the obvious value pick, and a large box priced just high enough to anchor the medium one as reasonable by comparison. Retailers do it with anchor pricing on physical shelves, placing a premium, rarely purchased item next to a mid-range item to shift what feels like a normal price in your head before you even look at the cheapest option on the shelf. Here's the part that should genuinely bother you if you manage people. You are probably running this exact play on your own team without ever deciding to. Think about the last time you brought 3 options to a stakeholder meeting. A safe, boring option nobody would object to. The option you actually wanted approved. And a third option, deliberately weaker, deliberately more expensive, or deliberately riskier, that you barely expected anyone to pick. If that third option existed mostly to make your preferred option look reasonable by comparison, you were not presenting an honest set of choices. You were building a decoy, whether or not you ever used that word for it. This shows up constantly in vendor selection too. Procurement teams routinely request 3 bids for a contract, and it is an open secret in sales that the bid nobody expects to win still gets submitted anyway, purely to make a competitor's pricing look reasonable next to it. If you are the one running a vendor RFP, ask yourself honestly whether every bidder on your shortlist could genuinely win, or whether one of them is there purely as a price anchor for the vendor you already favor. Performance review calibration sessions run an eerily similar risk. When a manager ranks 3 employees for a single promotion slot, and one of those 3 was never seriously in contention, that calibration meeting isn't producing a fair comparison. It's producing a predetermined outcome wearing the costume of a fair process. And the employee who was never really a candidate can often sense it, even if nobody says so directly. Board presentations are maybe the highest stakes version of all of this. Present a board with a conservative option, an aggressive option, and the option management actually wants approved sitting comfortably in the middle, and you have built a 3-tier decoy structure at the scale of an entire company's strategic direction. Boards that catch on to this pattern start discounting management's framing entirely, which is a much more expensive form of the same trust damage that happens on a smaller team. Managers do this constantly with project budgets, with vendor comparisons, even with candidate offer packages during hiring, structuring 3 compensation options where 2 exist purely to frame the third as the obviously fair one. That is not automatically dishonest. Framing choices well is a real skill, and helping stakeholders reach a good decision faster is genuinely useful work when it is done in good faith. The problem starts the moment the decoy stops being about clarity and starts being about manipulation, because that is exactly where this tactic turns from persuasion into something that quietly damages trust. Here is the mechanism working against you if you overuse it. The moment someone on your team, or a client, or your own boss actually notices that one of your options was never viable, something breaks that does not repair quickly. They do not just distrust that one decision, they start re-examining every option you have ever presented them, wondering how many of those were real choices and how many were decoys dressed up as choices. Trust in how you frame decisions is a resource, not a renewable one. It does not regenerate the moment you get caught spending it badly, and rebuilding it takes far longer than it took to break. So how do you use this honestly instead of getting burned by it in both directions, as someone who builds options and as someone who evaluates the options handed to you? If you are the one building the options, the test is simple. Every option on your list needs to be genuinely defensible on its own terms, not just there as a foil for the option you actually want approved. If you cannot articulate a real, specific reason a rational person might choose option A over option B, you don't actually have 3 real choices. You have 1 real choice and 2 stage props, and eventually someone in the room will notice the stage. If you are the one being handed options, and this is arguably the more useful skill for most people watching this, the fix is to explicitly ask what happens if you remove the most extreme option from the table entirely. If your preference completely flips the moment you delete the worst-looking or most expensive choice, that tells you the option itself never actually mattered on its own merits. It was a comparison tool aimed directly at you. Vendors selling you software, agencies pitching you a retainer, even your own direct reports proposing a project structure, all use this same three-option shape more often than most people expect once you actually start looking for it deliberately. There's a deeper point buried in the wine list example that a lot of people miss entirely, and it's worth sitting with for a second. The manipulation here is not really about the fake option at all. It is about outsourcing your own judgment to whatever happens to be sitting next to your choice on the page. Most people never independently ask whether a price is fair or whether a feature set actually matches what they need. They ask whether this option looks better or worse than the thing sitting next to it, and that single habit is the entire surface area a decoy needs to work on anyone, including people who already know the theory exists. This sits inside a much broader family of behavioral economics findings about how humans use comparison and context instead of absolute judgment, the same family that gives us anchoring bias and contrast effects more generally, and it is one of the more practical corners of that research for anyone who has to design options for other people as part of their actual job. It's worth noting a close cousin of this effect, sometimes called the compromise effect, because the two get confused constantly. A decoy pulls choice toward whichever option genuinely dominates it. A compromise effect is subtly different. It makes the middle option in any lineup look safer purely because it sits between two extremes, regardless of whether either extreme was ever a real contender. Retailers lean on the compromise version constantly with physical products a consumer can literally hold, television sizes on a showroom wall, mattress firmness levels, laptop storage tiers, stand in front of 3 televisions priced low, medium, and high. And most shoppers gravitate to the middle one, specifically because it is the middle one, not because they did any independent research into whether that specific screen is actually the best value. Mattress firmness works the same way. Soft, medium, and firm laid out side by side nudges most buyers toward medium by simple position in the lineup, even when their actual sleeping preference was never surveyed. Once you know to look for this, you'll notice retail floors are laid out deliberately to create exactly that middle feels safe sensation, which is a slightly different lever than a true decoy but works through the same underlying comparison-based judgment. Here's a concrete checklist for anyone negotiating a vendor contract or reviewing a set of internal proposals, since that's where managers actually apply this day to day. First, count how many of the options on the table could genuinely be selected by a reasonable person, not counting yours. Second, ask what happens to your own preference if the most extreme option quietly disappears. Third, ask the person presenting the options directly why each one is there, and watch for hesitation on any single one of them. A vendor, a job candidate's offer package, or a colleague's project proposal that survives all 3 of those questions is probably an honest set of choices. One that collapses under any of them was built to be seen through eventually anyway, so you might as well see through it now instead of after the money, or the trust is already spent. It's also worth remembering that none of this means every 3-option proposal is secretly dishonest. Plenty of genuinely good decision-making produces 3 real defensible paths forward: a cautious option, a moderate option, and an ambitious option that are all actually viable given different appetites for risk. The difference between that and a decoy setup isn't the number of options on the table, it's whether every option could survive being chosen. A framework this useful gets abused constantly precisely because it works so well, and the same manager who resents being manipulated by a vendor's 3-tier pricing page will sometimes build an identical structure for their own team without ever connecting the two. Noticing that inconsistency in yourself is usually the fastest way to actually change how you present choices going forward, faster than any amount of reading about the theory in the abstract, and it costs nothing more than a moment of honest self-review before your next meeting. So the real, usable takeaway for anyone managing people or budgets is this. Before you bring any set of options to your team, your boss, a vendor shortlist, a calibration session, or a board, run your own list through an honesty check first. Strip out anything that exists purely to make another option look better by comparison rather than standing on its own. If your list survives that cut and still has real, independently defensible choices left over, you are framing a decision well, and that is a genuinely useful management skill worth keeping. If your list collapses down to one real option the moment you remove the props, you were never actually offering a decision. You were offering a script, and it is only a matter of time before someone in the room reads ahead of you. Follow along if you want more of these theories broken down the same way, the part that actually changes how you run a meeting, not just the trivia version of it.